Simon Furman, writer extraordinaire. Being that this is my first panel that I've ever done, I'll just throw it over to you, let you guys ask the questions and have some fun for the next, hour.
Well, actually, we decided to choreograph a little thing here.
I'll just leave it to the experts.
Is there dancing? Is there singing?
We didn't choreograph that much.
No song and dance.
Simon suggested, since this is my very first Transformers convention, and you've already heard him talk ad infinitum, so he's already told you all this story, that I should give you a little introduction to the very, very beginnings of Transformers as far as the publishing world, because I was there. So basically what happened, assuming you're interested in hearing this.
Oh, sure.
We are sort of here, aren't
That
we?
is why we bought these tickets.
Oh, well, I thought it was too sign. Okay. Anyway, basically what happened was sometime in the fall of 1983, when I was an editor on the staff at Marvel Comics, Jim Shooter, who was editor-in-chief, and Denny O'Neil, who was a senior editor and a longtime comic book writer, I wasn't there at this point, but somehow they got together as Hasbro, and Hasbro decided to launch this new series called Transformers, this new toy line, and come to Marvel and have Marvel develop it, just like Marvel had developed G.I. Joe for them a couple of years earlier. So between the two of them, they generated a treatment, which is a backstory to what the Transformers world would be like. and a whole bunch of character profiles and names and such. And for reasons that I'm not quite clear on, since again I wasn't exactly in the process yet. Once the treatment got through, Hasbro approved it eventually. Once the treatment got through and the names and character profiles were submitted, Hasbro had a lot of difficulty with some of the names. There was a lot of names and whatever character profiles were written at that point. And Denny didn't want to continue developing it. So Jim Shooter went around the office looking for a warm body. Several warm bodies turned him down because, frankly, at that time, you're looking for editors who had writing experience. Either editors were too busy doing other things, or the deadline was too short, or they didn't have any interest in involving themselves in a whole new toy line, or whatever. But anyway, I was probably, furthest down the hall or something. So I was probably like the third or fourth person that Jim Shooter asked. And it was right before Thanksgiving weekend, the week before Thanksgiving, I remember that. And it had to be done like over the weekend, and I had to revise, I frankly don't remember, maybe, I think there was initially 28 toys in the first toy line or something like that. I had to revise the majority. And so I did. And Hasbro basically was very happy with what I produced. And that's how I got involved with Transformers as an editor at Marvel Comics. And then, from that, we launched the 4-issue limited series, which came out, I guess, in early '84. And I was the editor on that. And basically, that caught us all by surprise. It was a 4-issue limited series because really nobody expected it to go beyond 4 issues. We had no sense of how popular Transformers would eventually become, and that I would be here 20 years later. So after that, I guess soon into the run of Transformers, that limited series, it was decided that the book would continue as a regular monthly title. And we were so naive back then. Nowadays, if we took a limited series and we continued it, or publishing, not we, but a publishing company would continue it, they would have an issue 0 and an issue 1 and an issue 1A, and with a chrome cover and all these different. All we did was do issue 5. We were naive. We just didn't know. We didn't know what we were doing. In any case, so with issue 5, I stopped editing it, and I continued on the book as the writer until issue 55, with a couple of fill-in issues thrown in the mix. And so basically, I became immersed in the Transformers world. Hasbro, through Marvel, Hasbro came to me to develop all their toys from then on, as far as their personality profiles and their names. So for the next 5 years, I got involved with naming and writing the profiles. Probably, I don't know how many, like over 100, maybe 200 of the toys. All the packaging copy that was on the Hasbro toys during that period. Not every one, but the majority of them. I wasn't involved with the movie characters or anything like that. But the majority of them were things that I worked on with Hasbro. And then, like I said, issue 55 was my last issue. And before I got to that, I was pretty well burnt out on Transformers the last year or two because, quite frankly, although I enjoyed doing it and I enjoyed developing storylines and characters, every 6 months or so, Hasbro would slap me with another 50 characters to introduce. And it became kind of a burden. So, I definitely wanted to move off, and I was kind of begging my editor, Don Daly, at that time, to put me out of my misery, but he kept begging me to stay on. And finally, here's where Simon comes in. Finally, I happened to take a trip to England. I guess, had we met before they used to come to the Marvel office?
Yes,
Yeah, we had met before that. I'd taken a trip to England, and I stopped by the Marvel UK offices. And you had already been working on the Marvel UK, whatever you would call the fill-in issues that you had to fill in for the publication schedule in England. And so anyway, so Simon can take it from there.
Well, here we were in February 1989.
Right.
Bob was over from the US, so being, sort of sociable as we were at Marvel UK at the time, we thought, well, we'll take him out for lunch and generally just keep him happy. It's the parent company, we've got to look after ourselves here. So out we went for lunch, sitting in a restaurant in Covent Garden, and Bob basically was telling me what he's told you, that he's kind of burned out on Transformers, and hell, the book's not going to last more than a few more issues. And, so Simon, do you want it?
I'd run it into the ground pretty much, I thought so anyway.
So he said, Simon, do you want it? And I thought, well, how can I refuse such an offer? So, but of course, I was immersed in it all by then, the UK side of it, and I knew Bob's work inside and out because we had to loop our stories in and out of the American continuity, just because, we were reprinting in the UK comic. So, I knew all the storylines, I knew exactly where Bob was with things. So, sort of once Bob said, take it, so kind of throwing it at me across the table, I thought, great.
I just want to say, I hope you picked up the tab for that lunch.
Marvel UK probably did. So, and that was where I picked it up from there. I don't even know whether Don was involved in the process of changing writers, really.
Well, as an editor, Don wasn't really involved. He kind of passively watched things go across his desk and things got published.
So issue 56 I picked up, and to be honest, I didn't think it was going to last a huge amount longer. So I thought, well, great, at least it gives me some license to just go crazy with this book, So it started. I'd always been using the movie characters in the UK comics. So I thought, well, here we go. Let's have our apocalyptic Unicron battle in the US comic and maybe wrap it up with that. But it rolled on. It rolled on for 25 issues. I have no idea why particularly, and but I guess it was just there was enough there to keep it rolling for people. And in sales terms today, you look at comic books today, they're selling, the top 5 are selling 110, 120,000. The original comic book, G1 comic, was cancelled on 70,000, which these days would put it in the top 20 at least.
Wow.
So this is how things have changed in the comics industry. That was a low-selling book back then, and they used to clear space at Marvel for new titles just by sort of cutting off anything under 100,000, or sometimes over 100,000.
Right. I used to be the illustrator on the first Ghost Rider series, which ended around 1981, and that was canceled because sales had dropped to under 110,000.
So at this point, I was working with Jose Delbo on the series, as the sort of established artist. And then around about the same time, both Bob and I got involved in another project. It was animals in exosuits.
Oh, I blocked that.
Brute force.
Brute force, that's right, yes. How could I forget?
That convention will be in September, right?
And this kind of pulled Jose onto that book for a while. So it left a vacuum for an artist. Now, originally, my first suggestion was Jeff Senior, who had done a lot of the UK work, and had actually already filled in for Jose a couple of times, just for deadline crunches. Jeff, though, had other commitments at the time, so we were still needing a regular artist for the book. I went to Don Daly and suggested Andrew for the book. Don had somebody else lined up that he really wanted to try for the book. So we went with Don's suggestion, and that didn't really work out. And so back came Andrew for issue 69. It should have been 68, but it ended up being 69. And that's where Andrew came into the whole mix.
Yeah, I think what happened was Jeff Senior, when he took up the role, he was only going to do it for 4 issues, wasn't he? No, he wasn't. He was going to run with it regularly. Then he wanted to take a break from doing. I don't know how many he did. What issue did he start on?
He only did maybe 4 or 5 issues in total, I think, but they were scattered. They weren't.
Yeah, so he was running with the book, and then he wanted to take a break off of it to do the Death's Head graphic novel. And so he needed a 4-issue break, and then that's when they asked me to do it. And they asked me to do a 2-page tryout for it. So I did these 2 pages, and I remember talking to Rob Tokar, the editor, and I say, what shall I? Actually, I think Don was still the editor.
Yeah.
Rob was the assistant, but you didn't really hear much from Don. And it's always Rob. And I said, how shall I treat this? And he gave me a few pointers as to how I should draw it. So I kind of did these 2-page samples. And they looked at them, they just said, no, we're not going to give you the book. They just turned me down flat. It's like, oh, okay, fine. And then, I think that's then when they commissioned somebody to do 68, and they weren't particularly happy with, for some reason, how that was working out. So then they came back to me and they said, are you interested in, are you still interested in doing it? And I said, yeah, I really am. So they said, okay, well, the book's yours. At that point, I decided I would do what I wanted to do rather than what they'd asked me to do. I thought I'd assume the arrogance of thinking, well, they told me what I should draw. They told me I should draw nice, clean line robots, nice and straight, make them look metal and clunky and all that kind of thing. And that's not how I wanted to do it anyway. So when they actually gave me the book, that was why I then moved into doing that slightly more organic look that a lot of people either like or they don't. It seems to be the one thing that people recognise my work for amongst some of the others. And I just really, really ran with that. And then the whole debate about Transformers don't have teeth, all these. My Transformers have teeth, they're metal teeth. But yeah, it was great. So ran with it Jeff came in to do the double-sized 75th issue because he'd always, I think, expressed a preference to do that double-sized issue. So,
and there was also a deadline issue because it was a double-sized issue. It was just, we were running fairly close to deadline all the way through this. So physically, I just don't think Andrew could have done 75 and carried on.
No, I don't know, maybe not. No, it's nice actually to see Jeff come back and do the big apocalyptic issue because he was good at that stuff. I think I very much felt, from my point of view, that that's what Jeff did really well, the really big stuff. And I think what I liked was the more subtle kind of character interplay and the subtleties of gesture and the detail and all that kind of thing. So it was quite right that Jeff did that issue, and then I picked up after it, and we ran through until 80. It was supposed to go on longer than that. We'd already pretty much decided where it was going, and then suddenly we had to really put the foot on the gas because they wanted everything that Simon was going to do wrapped up in like one issue. So it became a bit compact, the last issue. But yeah, there we go. Anything you want to add to that?
No. If anybody wants now just to ask questions, we're open for all questions, but if we can keep them more original G1 based, because I'll be there to answer Dreamwave questions this afternoon and around, so if we can keep it G1 specific, Marvel.
Where did you get the idea behind the US comic number 70?
This would be the one with the sort of mushed together Megatron and Ratchet. Well, it just seemed to suggest itself from something that Bob had already set up in his run. Well, actually, no, it wasn't your one. Sorry, it was the beginning of mine, where. Sorry about that, Bob.
Clearly interchangeable people.
But basically, there's a bit where Ratchet throws himself at Megatron and they disappear through this portal, and it just seemed sort of. It just threw open this sort of Frankenstein's monster option for a story of, because the trouble is we had brought back Megatron already, and it was like, well, how do we bring back Megatron again, and it's dramatic, and it's this, so, it made it sense just to try and do it in a very different way. And once sort of Andrew got hold of it and did, because it was fine to write this, it was absolutely wonderful to write the script. They're kind of pushed together, and there's maybe a leg sticking out here because they still had to kind of ambulate on 2 legs, and so it was fine to write. And then I sort of just threw it to Andrew like, I don't know what to say. and just go, you figure it out. So,
Where's the reference for this then, Simon? There isn't any, yeah.
do you want to add to that?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun actually to do that right at the very beginning because, I mean, it's really good, as with most comics, you work from reference. They're all previous established characters, and Transformers is very much that. And you would have all the previous issues to look at for visual reference, plus some of the model sheets from the animated movie, whatever. There's lots and lots of reference. But to have, although they were two established characters, to right from the word go, to be able to put something together that was kind of mine, was great to initially make a stamp on it. And the thing that I think even Rob was surprised at was the level at which I tried to maintain the continuity on that thing. And that pretty much, I set my own benchmark by doing that. So when the Megarach character was established, and then there's some kind of fight scene, isn't there, where he slams them all against the wall, and it's like, bits are going to fall off here, aren't they? Yeah, so I make bits fall off, and it's like, I've got to remember which bits have fallen off. And then he goes shuffling off down the corridor, and there's more bits falling off. And so every time I saw him, I made sure that he either looked the same as he had done before, or that there was another little bit missing, another thing had fallen out, whatever, because that just seemed to add to the torment of the character. Because it did draw in some ways from a popular movie of the time.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
Or should I not say that?
No. I mean, there's a line that's almost directly ripped off this popular movie at the time, or a scene. The little scene at the end where the Megarach creature, sort of grabs the gun and puts it at its own head. Does anybody know where that scene comes from? What movie? Yes,
Yeah.
the remake, the Cronenberg remake of The Fly, is basically where I stole that scene wholesale. So there you go. There's the confession for the panel. Any other questions? Go ahead, directly.
Some questions for Bob. I know it's been 20 years back, but can you give us an idea of what you did to look at a toy, come up with a name, come up with the backstory of that, and little spec cards and whatnot? Because that's what made Transformers different than a lot of other toy lines. These robots was that storyline that came with the toy. I'm just wondering where you came up with those things.
Well, I pulled names from everywhere. I looked at here. I brought some samples. Hold on a second. I thought somebody might ask a question. I never throw anything out, which, much to the chagrin of my wife. And, anyway, we would get. Well, I think in the early days, I don't even know if we got this. We just got the toys. But we'd get model sheets from Hasbro, like something like this, and it would show the toy. The toy very simply. I guess either Headmasters, perhaps. It would show them very simply, like what they look like in their various forms. So I would get an idea of what they did, and then from that I would look for some words that sort of had some connotation connecting to, whether it was a car or a flying vehicle or an undersea vehicle or a dinosaur or something. And I guess I just had a facility with putting some words together. So I would come up with names that way. And as far as the profiles, I was in the comic book industry for several years before that. I read comics when I was a kid. I was just able to grab out of the ether ideas of how to make somebody have a character that somebody could build something off of, I suppose. Plus the fact, and this is one time when I was at the Hasbro headquarters, we'd go there frequently to consult with them about Transformers development. One of the people I was dealing with there, I forget who it was, one of the account executives or something, said to me, "Were you ever in the military?" Because I used to throw all this technical military type jargon into the profiles, and he didn't know where I got it from. I have a degree, I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, which I've never used, except for that, except for coming up with jargon for the Transformers. So I told him that's probably where I got some of these words from, and I was able to kind of sprinkle it throughout the various profiles I wrote, and I guess give them a certain special feel that fit the Transformers. So there you go.
How did you or Hasbro come up with the idea that they were sort of self-aware robots from an alien planet as opposed to, say, robots they built in...
Funny you should say that.
Funny you should say that. Civil war rages on the planet Cybertron. Destruction is catastrophic and widespread, and yet no life is lost. None at least. I didn't is in the sense that we know life, for the inhabitants of Cybertron are all machines. There is no life on Cybertron save for mechanical electronic creatures. Now, I didn't write that. Jim Shooter wrote that, former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. This is the actual treatment that was approved, that I was handed back in 1983 to base whatever I wrote off of. And I don't know what Hasbro gave Jim Shooter in their initial conversation, what they said, like these have to be living robots and they have to come from another planet. Really don't know that. I do know that he put it all together in this, and so basically everything that's come afterward descends from this document here. So the armed guards will have to sort me out.
Right in the back. Yeah.
Both of you, when you were writing, seem to have a special love for Grimlock. Bob did a whole bit where Grimlock became the leader of the Autobots and then the psychotic. And of course, well, the Grimlock badass. So, what is it about Grimlock character that you each find so compelling? Because it seems like as writers you have a special love for that character.
Okay, well, I mean, actually, I've got a question for Bob after this. I want to know whether he came up with Grimlock's character. I assume so.
Yeah, I did. You know, I just remembered, this is kind of a vague memory, but the Dinobots were being introduced. I wanted to bring him into the book in a big way. Grimlock was definitely the leader of the Dinobots. I gave him a big role, and I may have gone a little bit too far over the edge where he was so inhumane. You know, I might have been playing with that idea a little too much when I look back at those issues, but you know, I guess sometimes, I think Simon might agree with this, when you're a writer and you come up with an initial story, an initial characterization and bringing in a character in a major way, it sort of takes a life of its own. It kind of like leads you down paths you don't expect. So perhaps in that case, I think with Grimlock, he probably went on and he had more presence than I initially anticipated.
I mean, I think it's that old story that nobody really created Daffy Duck, you know, right, fully realised. He just, you know, he developed, he was just a duck that walked on in one of the Warner Brothers cartoons at one time. But, you know, over successive writers and incarnations, he became that character, you know, they added something else, and so finally you get Daffy Duck. And I think that's a lot of that way with Transformers. I mean, obviously, there was a lot more put in at the outset with the Transformers characters, but once they got going in the stories, sometimes the characters take you in certain directions. They become the kind of driving force of the story. And certainly with Grimlock, for me, it was that every time I had him in a scene, he seemed to suggest story options. He seemed to lead you in directions, because he was just this sort of wonderfully bull-headed, positive, I mean, utterly positive in what he believed, but, you know, there was this sort of, you know, I will not stop. I have a course of action and I will not stop. And once you've got that kind of momentum rolling in the stories tend to roll out of that. So I think that's why I used to like Grimlock. You could put him in any scene, and you would have various options, and exciting options, of where it would go from there. So he was just a great character to write.
Yeah, I noticed just recently, I was kind of doing a cram session for this convention. I was reviewing a whole bunch of old comics that I wrote. And I noticed, like, when things would happen where Optimus Prime or a character like that had to make a choice, he had to consider what he was going to do. And, you know, and somebody would suggest something and says, no, that's not the right option because it might hurt somebody. Grimlock never really paused to consider those options. You're absolutely right. He was bullheaded. He just went ahead and things were very black and white.
Yeah.
For Mr. Furman, you mentioned that things were rushed at the end with G1, that you had plans, but everything got truncated and squished together. Do you remember specifically things that you wish you could have done but didn't have the chance to? And specifically, I'm curious about the Action Masters, if you had certain plans with that.
Well, I think the ultimate plan with the Action Masters, I mean, we had to bring the Action Masters in. I personally, and sorry Hasbro, think they were the dumbest idea. But, you know, sort of, here we had these Transformers that didn't transform, so, you know, we introduced them into story, but always my game plan was to turn them back into real Transformers afterwards. You know, we had to a certain amount of contractual obligation, bring in these characters as Action Masters. But, you know, it was always my you know, the effects of the nucleon that turned them into Action Masters was going to be reversed at some point. I doubt I'd actually formulated how, but you know, so it was certainly going. There was certainly going to be some resolution to that. You know, I mean, the thing is, we set up this huge storyline with Grimlock, you know, having to make this decision to reactivate the Dinobots, you know, no matter what the cost, and that, you know, just them becoming Action Masters was not going to be the end of it. You know, there had to be more of a price to this. You know, hence the whole sort of price of life storyline that we did. But of course, we just never got into that. You know, it just ended really with things like that. Other things like the Last Autobot was going to be, you know, the kind of prehistoric Transformers storyline that I'm kind of doing with War Within in little bits, with the Fallen and the original Transformers, and it was going to roll out into a something like that. That there was a sort of previous, you know, sort of set of Transformers that nobody really knew much about and have been hidden away, and most of them are dead and so forth. So, you know, there were plans, but they were largely unformulated. I had sort of large storyline goalposts set up, but not quite how we're going to sort of dribble the ball towards the goalpost to get there.
Does anybody understand English football references?
Yes. Yeah.
As you may or may not know, there's been talk about a new Transformers movie being developed. Now, with the Spider-Man movies, they had gotten advice from Stan Lee as to developing it. Has anybody with DreamWorks approached you or Budiansky about advising from certain characters? And if not, would you like the job?
I'm going to write the whole thing.
I'm willing to leave my phone number for anybody who wants to call, but
I mean, back when this was first mooted, the idea, I did get in touch with Don Murphy and spoke to Don Murphy. So, you know, I've kind of made the contact which I need to follow up. But, you know, I mean, I assume if there is any role, it will be a purely advisory, you know, sort of, kind of, some kind of background role. But, you know, I mean, yes, if it's on offer like Bob, you know, I'm there.
For everybody generally, I noticed that in the cartoon there was a Spike Witwicky. In the comic there was a Buster Witwicky, and then when Fortress Maximus was introduced, because of the name of the toy, there had to be a Spike Witwicky. Where did the idea come up, or why was there a Buster instead of a Spike in the first case? And when Spike was introduced, where was the idea to make him a peacenik? Where did that come from? Also, I mean, just generally, I like the way the Fortress Maximus was drawn very well, especially in the battle with Galvatron. That was awesome.
I don't remember that.
I mean, funny enough, I asked Bob about the Jetfire, Skyfire thing. It came up something to do
yeah.
with
Well,
that.
actually, I have some clues about Spike and Buster right here in my hand. Now, again, Jim Shooter wrote this, and it talks about Spike, despite his name, and then crossed out in my handwriting is Buster. And several times. Spike, Buster. So somebody, probably somebody at Hasbro, didn't like the name Spike, and it was changed to Buster. And it was communicated to me either directly or through Jim Shooter, I don't know. But I mean, literally, this is my handwriting, crossing out a typed word, Spike. So I'm assuming that at some point, this treatment got through to Saban or whoever was, you know, without my cross out. So it became Spike in the cartoons.
Where did the idea come to make Spike a peacenik? In the comic. When he became the head, when he was introduced and became the head of Fortress Maximus.
I suppose it came from me, but if I wrote it, I don't remember that. I don't remember.
Make something up quick.
Let me see my notes again. No, I don't really recall that exactly. Yes.
I know this was a job for you guys, but did you find yourself enjoying the concept or the design such that you own any of these?
That we own them?
Yeah, did you enjoy the concept and the design? Did any of you guys get any of these toys? Do you own any of them?
Oh, to own the toys. Oh, I think you meant like own own Optimus Prime, the name. We get a nickel off of every toy sold. That would be something. Well, when I was involved with Transformers, basically I got product from Hasbro, samples, but I had some of them, but didn't get all of them.
Are they in a place with a prominent display at your home?
You'd probably be disappointed to know where they're being held. I don't want to destroy any illusions here.
I mean, the huge disappointment to me is when we were working in Marvel UK.
I never had any.
Yes.
I would just like to say that I think that, oh, I'm sorry, that you called me.
I did.
Oh, okay. That as comic book writers, I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of talent is required to produce a comic book, because as a novelist or a person who writes books, you have 800 pages to describe and to produce background and atmosphere, and you guys have this little skinny paper thing, and you've got to have your art, and you only have those little bubbles, and somehow you guys manage to produce these amazing stories in just this minimum amount of space, and I think that takes a lot of talent.
Thank you.
I mean, one of the things, coming from a UK comics background, this was kind of drummed into us right away, because we come from a sort of format where you didn't have 22 pages to tell a story. You have maybe 3 or 4 pages. You've got to cram an awful lot in. You've got to compress your story to the point where nothing is wasted. So by the time I came to write American comics for Marvel, it was great. You know, having 22 pages was a luxury.
As an artist as well, the process of making the jump from the UK comics onto the American comics was very different, given that Transformers was my first American work. So as I guess a lot of you know, with the UK writing, every page was described, every panel was described. It would say what was in there, exactly what the dialogue was, because they had to be that precise about what was happening. But with 22 pages, I guess you can kind of loosen up a bit, so they do a broader overview of what's going on. And then as the artist, you have the opportunity to then move that around and play with things and take on I don't know, I guess you feel as though you're more involved. So working in the large format was good for the artists too.
One thing that's obviously different between a novel and a comic book is a comic book has pictures. It really carries the burden. Comics are a visual medium. And also, since I was an illustrator, I truly believe this. The more you can let the pictures tell the story, the better the comic book. And no matter how good the writer is, you don't want to get too bogged down in a long, windy, written, expositional kind of comic. You want to move through the pictures. And I don't know if we achieved that as a writer, but that was always the goal.
I mean, there was interesting different styles when I came to Marvel US, because the Marvel method was to work what they call plot style, which was largely to drop, sort of 4 or 5 pages into one description of what's happening there. So you do a sort of overview almost of what's going to happen on pages 6 to 10 or whatever. So, it's much more the emphasis on the artist to sort out the pacing, the construction of the pages, what you're going to give emphasis to on the page. But with full script, which is the UK version, although now I know it's a lot more sort of prevalent both sides of the Atlantic, you nail down everything. You put the dialogue in there for a start, which you don't with plot style. You may make suggestions, but largely, you just leave it open for the artist to interpret. You see the pages, and then you come in with the dialogue. So it's a very different process as a writer to basically be presented with pages, sometimes wonderfully, that you look at and go, wow, I never saw that coming, that's brilliant, I can do wonderful things with that. And sometimes you think, the guy's drawn a big head on the whole page, and I have no room to put any dialogue. Which happened to me on one comic, not Transformers, I hasten to add, but it did happen on one where, my description for 2 pages had been probably, about 6 or 8 panels probably, and it came up with one big headshot and a couple of smaller pics across the spread, so it gets difficult at that point.
The one advantage with the full script sort of UK way of doing it, as opposed to, although I prefer the American plot, one advantage with the full script is that because you have all the dialogues there, because I always like to use gesture and expression and get a lot of character into them, with the full script you have the opportunity to it's not lip sync as such, but you can get an expression or a mouth shape that in some way expresses what's in the balloon. With the plot, with the American plot style, you sometimes they give you the occasional line, but generally you don't have all the dialogue. So you end up with what a lot of people used to call the Alleluia chorus, where all your characters go, which cuts down on some of the kind of potential emotion that you're displaying.
I have a question for you, Bob. Just in terms of how far ahead did you plan out story arcs when you were writing, and were there any particular characters that you enjoyed writing for more than others?
How far ahead did I plan out story arcs? I think it varied. I mean, sometimes I'd be able to plan out, 6 months in advance, and sometimes it was issue to issue. It really, I mean, depended on a lot of things. Like, for instance, if Hasbro was bringing in a whole new line of toys, and I knew I had to get them in the comic book, so I had to start planning ahead to get them into some storyline. So it kind of varied depending on various external circumstances as well as whatever I had in mind already. What was the other?
I was just asking for particular characters that you enjoyed writing.
Oh,
other than Grimlock.
actually, I didn't care about it. I think I like Blaster and Ratchet earlier on. And, what else did I write? All of them. I love them all. Shockwave, Starscream later on, and this, what I wrote. I think I had some fun with Rat Bat, although maybe. The ultimate being counter. There's probably a few others, but I have to have them all in front of me. So, oh yeah, right. So.
We had an interesting situation on the UK comic because we were having to sort of tie in our stories into Bob's. We would sometimes either have feast or famine. Either we'd know, lots of stuff that was coming up and think, fantastic, sort of we can plan, we can use these characters because Bob's not using them. And other times we had almost nothing, so we had to sort of run these stories thinking, oh God, I hope he's not going to bring Megatron back in this story. So, sometimes we just had to take a shot in the dark, but other times we did have, sort of some advance info on what Bob was doing.
Benson.
One question for each. Bob, there's often been unfair talk about the G1 title where people only focus on Micromaster Wrestling and Power Wash. It's something contrasted by the dark storylines that you write as well. I mean, totally not a shock content also. Can you just talk a little bit about the contrast between doing the light stories as opposed to dark stories?
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to have fun with the book, and I wanted my readers to have fun. I didn't want it to. Sometimes, especially, I was with Marvel for almost 20 years, and it seemed like there was a trend growing. Like every time you read a comic, you felt like you were just dragged through the gutter. All these horrible, awful things were happening to people, and life was as bleak as possible. And although, obviously the Transformers were two sides involved in this war that lasted forever, it was pretty brutal. I didn't want it to just be about that. I wanted to play off, obviously if you read any of my books, I really wanted to play off the fact that here are a bunch of alien, giant, extremely dangerous robots walking around the Earth. And although that creates all sorts of very serious situations, it could also create some fish out of water situations. Like you mentioned a couple of the more notorious stories I wrote in that regard. So I wanted to throw that in there to kind of just mix it up so that anybody reading Transformers didn't necessarily know what to expect from issue to issue. And even in some of the darker stories, I think I always try to sprinkle in some humorous aside, some sarcasm, some wisecrack, something to sort of lighten it up, just give it a more full-bodied flavor.
Regarding the style of the other Transformers,
yeah.
With the more organic way,
yeah.
Was that partially because you wanted to be able to make it more expressive?
Well, There's the War Within 2 graphic novel is coming out soon, and they asked me to write the introduction to that because that's kind of related to what I write in that. Because a lot of people ask me those kind of questions, in as much as I didn't actually want to do Transformers in the first place, and I know that's not kind of a very popular thing to say, but I didn't know anything about Transformers really. I mean, I'd done some of the UK stuff purely because I was looking for work. When I was doing the UK stuff, what I did before Transformers was Thundercats, and back then we didn't have that many titles in the UK, and they were all licensed stuff. They were like toy stuff, weren't they? And Thundercats was the book that everybody wanted to get onto because Thundercats was the one that was more superhero in its nature. It was like drawing superheroes because we all had these great aspirations of working for Marvel in America. We wanted nothing more. And then I did the Transformers stuff for the UK, and it was fine. It was paying work. To then get the opportunity to work for Marvel US was fantastic. But I would rather have done a book other than Transformers. So some of that is why I took this organic approach, because I wanted to draw real people. And, so a lot of people said that they look like real people in robot costumes. Well, that's largely the reason for it. But as you'll read in the introduction to the War Within graphic novel, I feel very differently about that now that I look back on it. But that's how I felt at the time. So it's just because I wanted to draw real people.
And Simon, can you talk a little about how you came up with Death's Head?
Well, Death's Head was an interesting one. Death's Head was going to be a launch, sort of aimed solely at Marvel UK, never to touch the pages of Transformers. It was a pitch I'd had around for several months, in front of various powers that be at Marvel UK. And Marvel at the time were gearing up to do, originated American format comic books, and I wanted one of those to be Death's Head. The plain fact was, I don't think anybody there thought the idea of a guy who killed people for a living was a good idea for a comic book. Certainly not to sort of spearhead a new line, even though he was a robot and he killed sort of other robotic beings and so forth. But I just don't think anybody thought this was a strong front runner. So in the end, I was determined to show that this character could work, but we had limited options of where he could be. At the moment he existed as a pitch and a couple of sketches from Jeff. So, we had to do something with him. And the answer was, well, let's put him in Transformers. But that immediately opened up a huge problem in the fact that as soon as you put him into Transformers, you run into copyright problems with Hasbro. Sometimes unless you sort of make a specific copyright outside of that, you might have, well, he featured first in Transformers, he might be a Hasbro property. So we came up with the idea of running a one-page strip, just a sort of jokey, throwaway one-page strip that we ran in Dragon's Claws, which was the first launch in the new line. And in the meantime, we put him into Transformers, having decided that we've now Marvel copyright. We felt free to put him into Transformers. Transformers stuff came out first. So, he got his own sort of personality and style in Transformers. So when it came to do the Death's Head comic finally, he was sort of fully rounded and ready. So it just sort of grew organically out of that.
I think Death's Head is a metaphor for Simon Furman, really. I mean, it's just so obvious, isn't it? He kills characters for a living.
Yes.
With the camera.
Okay. This question is for Bob. Bob, your issue number 24, After Death, where Optimus Prime dies. I found personally, from a science fiction point of view and a character point of view, it was some of your greatest work. Especially, given how the way the integrity you showed Optimus Prime, he was willing to sacrifice himself, where anybody else in his shoes would have said, "Oh, Megatron, she did great. This is my way out." But you showed the integrity of that character, and it went on, in my opinion, to show on just all the good Optimus Prime did afterwards. I always linked back to that. What I want to ask you is, where did you get the idea to do that? And also, did Hasbro tell you you have to kill off Optimus Prime?
I'm sure Hasbro didn't tell me that. Let's see. my feeling was about Optimus Prime, and I guess Megatron too, was I didn't want them to dominate. There were so many characters, I didn't want them to dominate the books. I mean, they're the leader, they're in charge of everything. You know, I wanted to move them off the center stage for a while, and I was trying to, I think what inspired After Death and other stories maybe similar like that, was I just wanted to find original ways, you know, surprising ways to keep characters out of the picture for a while. Keep the fans, you know, the fans would know, like, they're still out there, how is he going to bring them back? You know, trying to keep that suspense going for a while. And that was what pushed me to do a story like After Death, really. As far as the integrity issue, I mean, that's just who he was. You know, he had to make that awful decision to sacrifice himself.
Thank you.
Sure.
Simon, can you retell your April Fool's joke on Hasbro? Is that still around somewhere?
Right, I mean, what I will do is steer you towards a site called comicculture.com. Go and check out that. The third issue of Comic Culture, which is a magazine put out by Rob Tokar, has the definitive. We still don't have the actual April Fool's gag. Does everybody know about this? Is this a sort of story I'm tired to? Okay. Basically, when I was on the book, we decided as a sort of gag to sort of see how friendly Hasbro were going to be with us and how much attention they were paying to the book at that time and how much we could get away with. We thought we'd play an April Fool's gag on them. We'd come up with the most ridiculous, atrocious, unpublishable story outline we could think of, you know. So, you know, Rob just said, put anything in there you want, anything ridiculous, no matter how ridiculous it is. So I came up, I think we did it as something like the overview for issues 72 to 73. So issue 72 was about sort of 4 pages worth of just typewritten notes on what was going to happen in it. And we had giant cigar-smoking nuns duking it out with Megatron on a freeway, crushing, you know, some kids in prams and things. And we had a mechanical sheep on the ark stuffed with explosives that nobody dare touch until Cup is overcome by urges and you know, sort of gets carried away with and blows up the whole ark and all its occupants. You know, and so on and so on. We rolled out, you know, sort of ridiculousness after ridiculousness. And then, you know, sort of the final bit was a little note for issue 73. And then there were none, we called it. And then, you know, sort of the nun spelt as in N-U-N. And, you know, sort of, and then we just put, oops, they're all dead, as the story overview for that episode. And we sent it off to Hasbro with a memo dated 4/1, you know, so whichever year it was, I think 90, something like that. So off it went to Hasbro, we waited. And Rob was by now getting just a little bit worried about this, you know, sort of wondering, you know, would we just get a terrible reaction to this? Would they get the joke? Anyway, days go by and nothing from Hasbro on this pitch. So Rob is getting more and more worried, and, you know, I'm just the writer, I've just followed orders. So. Anyway, finally, he thinks he'd better phone Hasbro and ask them about this story pitch. So he phones the contact at Hasbro, who says, yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's good. It's pretty cool. We just have a few concerns. And so Rob's okay. So expecting they've got the gag. He goes, so what happens after this? They're all dead, aren't they? And so this was, and so Rob, of course, was now stuck. He didn't know what to say or do. They hadn't got the joke. He didn't know quite how to break it to them now that it was a joke. So he tried to steer them towards, have a look at the memo, you know, so what's the date? Yeah, it's 4/1/90. Okay, and what's that? Well, it's the 1st of April. Yeah, and what's that? It was a Sunday. No. So finally, April Fool's Day, and there's a silence on the phone. Absolute, you know, sort of, you know, for minutes, you know, so Rob tells it, for minutes of silence. And then finally, you know, Rob's thinking of, you know, clearing out his desk already. And then finally, the guy just breaks down laughing, and he's like, you guys, you know, you guys, I've got to do this on some other guy at Hasbro. So that, you know, it kind of told us two things. A, they were pretty good guys and they could take a joke. And B, they really weren't looking at what we were doing.
I bet they were after that.
But Rob tells his whole story in much detail, and about some other cover problems they had with Hasbro, where they had to kind of reattach heads to bodies, even though we had headmasters which lift off, completely from their shoulders. So, but if you go to comicculture.com, check out when issue 3 of the Comic Culture magazine is coming out. But Rob did a whole piece on that, which is just fabulous, and he remembers it far, far better than me, the actual detail of what went on in the storyline.
For Andrew.
Yeah.
I just want to let you know first that I thought your article was my favorite of the original.
Thank you.
But I just know if there are any issues that stand out to you as like representative of what you thought were like some of your best pages.
I don't remember much about the UK stuff. I don't know why I don't. I don't know, 70, I think, just because it was the first one, that whole beginning stuff, and the whole fly scenario, the pathos thing, that was really good. And the kind of work that all artists do this, they look at other work, other artists, and they don't rip it off, but you're influenced by things, or you see things that other people do that you think that's a really appropriate way of expressing a certain scene or whatever, and you just draw on certain things. So there was a particular artist and his work, I won't tell you who it is, by the way, that I was looking at the time that seemed so relevant to how I wanted to portray that, and so I worked really hard on that issue and probably the one after, because I wanted to make an impression, because I really wanted to tell the story well. And so I felt very, very satisfied with that. And Simon was right, actually. At points, it did become a rush towards the end. I liked all that stuff with... Simon was saying it, the way that some of the storylines were probably going to carry on with the Nucleon thing, and the planet where Grimlock went to, and there was that little character and all the foliage was made out of metal. I can't even remember what that was all about, but that was fun. So I was looking forward to doing more of that, because having a planet that was organic but metal as well was great, and just gave me more opportunity to put all those ridiculous toasters and hair dryers and vacuum cleaners in the background and screwdrivers and things, and all that little stuff going on. So that was fun. Yeah.
One more question. One more? Okay, one more question. Is there anyone? Oh, well, there's one hand up.
Great. This is for Bob. I know you're an artist also, and I was wondering if you had any role in designing any of the original characters that you wrote in the comics, like Straxus or Scround, anyone like that.
I don't believe I designed either one of them. I think I gave some more detailed description on Scrounge, but I did design some of the characters, not the Transformers themselves. Obviously, they came from Hasbro. But I designed Circuit Breaker, the original character sketch for that. And I remember, I think initially getting pages back from Don Perlin when I had the issues about the Scraplets. And it wasn't what I conceived, so I sent back some sketches to that. I also wound up drawing the cover to that one to really show this is what I want them to look like, these little mischievous mechanical devils. And that was and then there were several characters that are scattered throughout there that are based on people at the Marvel offices. There was the Robot Master character was based on a Marvel former editor-writer. There was a character named the Mechanic who was based on a Marvel editor. Who looked like that, and actually he was very handy at some things. And there was probably another bunch of characters that were either named after people, like a lot of my relatives were in there. Just threw in names of people I knew here and there.
Just by way of a blatant plug, that sketch for Circuit Breaker features in the upcoming Titan collection, Maximum Force. And we've also got some of Bob's original cover sketches in upcoming Titan collections. So, we're just working hard to put some extra bonus material in these collections. And like I say, we've got a lot of Bob's original art for Transformers. I think Andrew has one more thing to say before we wrap up.
Oh, me, yeah. I don't really know how to explain it really. Something that I would like to have seen when I was trying to get into comics and something that I never really had the opportunity to see, was original penciled artwork, because it only ever gets inked up, coloured, printed, and there you go, you see the finished article. If you're lucky, occasionally you'll see pages of finished inked artwork. But because I would have liked to have seen that when I was trying to get into comics, we've put together a whole series of packs based on the War Within 2 series. And you can order these off of the Wildfire website. Each pack will contain an issue of, whichever issue it is, of the War Within, signed by myself and Simon. And then what we've also put together are booklets that have got a copy of Simon's original script, so you can see how the script is all put together. And then photocopies of all the penciled artwork before it got inked and coloured. So if anyone is interested in that kind of thing, how a book's put together, come and talk to us. We'll show you these so you can have a look and see what they're like and give you the details of how you can order them.
And we would just say that there are a very limited number on one of the dealer tables today. Over at Paul's stand, which is the one with all the UK flags on it.
Yeah.
So you'll know it. We have got one of each. I mean, they're very limited at the moment. We just couldn't lug a lot of stuff over. But if people want to just go and look at what these are, they're on Paul's table. So, but you can order them off the site.
I will say on my behalf, since it's coming to an end, if people see me wandering around and the questions haven't been answered, feel free to walk up and ask. Okay?
Oh, I've also got, if anybody is interested in buying original artwork, I've brought with me the only remaining pages of the original Marvel stuff that I've got. So I'm looking to, if anybody was interested in buying or just having a look at some of that, that's cool too.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.